This comes from viewer Anon. This is somebody basically went around and aggregated some of the things that he had been saying about the test screenings. And viewer Anon seems to be one of these sort of anonymous scooping leaker insider accounts that is involved or somewhat has access to the results of the screening stuff. Like, you know, we don't know who any of these people are really, but you sort of over time start to get a feel for how are they maybe connected to the industry, where are their sources coming from. Viewer Anon, definitely a person connected on that side of things. So he says the F4 reactions are more consistently okay, whereas Superman reactions swing wildly between like love and didn't like and hate. So that's pretty crazy in and of itself. And I want to talk about that. There's other stuff that has come out as well. Again, we're not going to go spoilers in this portion of the show today, but I do want to dig in a little bit more to these comments. There's other things that are being said too, okay? So one of the things he said was F4 reactions are more consistently okay, whereas Superman reactions swing wildly. And he's asked about multiple endings for the Superman screenings, which was a rumor out there. He says it's possible, but unlikely. It's too late to reshoot a new finale, and the testing a false ending would be pointless because the feedback wouldn't be any good. That's fair. I think one of the areas where Marvel benefits, there's sort of baseline Marvel tone that has worked for a long time and people are used to, whereas DC's had a lot of different starts and stops, and people prefer wildly different approaches and Bristol when it's not their preferred take. Doesn't that sound a little bit like the Star Wars argument? Not to like jump ahead to the Andor stuff, but this has been my issue with Andor. I don't just personally reject it, but I also think it was bad for the brand because it is exactly what he's describing here for DC. Marvel has a pretty consistent tone. People are familiar with it and comfortable with it. DC, because it's been so varied for so long, you have different camps within the DC fandom that appreciate a certain type of DC tone and maybe not another one, okay? But he goes on to say this. I'll say this. I don't know what the general public will think about Superman, but I'm also not concerned about it as a movie. Very interesting there. Yeah, I guess he sort of has this angle on it, and I've heard this. I've heard at least this concern repeated from other people that I've talked to. There is sort of a concern of how the normies or the mass appeal audience will feel about Superman, you know, itself as a movie. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting there. I did not see it myself, despite various efforts to convince people. What would you say specifically liked about Superman? The people who like Superman, the character in pop culture, really, really like or love Superman the film. So he's suggesting there that from what he can gather, people that are comic book fans or appreciate the character of Superman really, really like this movie. But then there's a whole bunch of other people that have maybe never been hot on Superman. And I don't think a lot of people that are in that camp, the movie's not working for them. Now, that is kind of interesting, right? Because you think about Zack Snyder's stuff, and that Superman movie, Man of Steel, really did make a shit ton of money for a Superman movie compared to a lot of other Superman movies. That was an incredibly successful movie. And the thing that's kind of ironic about Man of Steel is it actually had maybe the opposite of this, where a lot of normies or just mainstream cinema fans, they liked Man of Steel quite a bit. But the hardcore Superman people maybe took a little bit more issue with it. You know, it's a lot more dark. Superman and his dad, that whole situation's weird. Of course, it ends with Clark snapping necks and cashing checks, which, by the way, just out of curiosity here, man, I really vividly remember people in my friend group that just after Superman killed Zod, they just, the 1,000% were out. Like, they just like arms crossed, like not into it at all. Hard against the movie. Did you guys have anybody like that in your life? I'm just wondering, chat. Was there anybody in your friend group or that you knew that after Superman killed Zod, they were like, boom, I'm out. I can't do this. Yeah. So you can see some people in chat saying, yeah, some of the people were that dude, Vandolph says. So this is not uncommon. I saw this reaction a lot, you know, just being a nerd, being in the comic book scene. man, there were some dudes at our comic book shop that were like, nope. And just, like it just was over for them at that moment, which I understand. But it's also fair to say that that was an incredibly successful Superman movie. So it worked. And I think particularly, coming out of Dark Knight, that sort of approach where Nolan and David Goyer were approaching it from this angle of like, how could this exist in the real world? That was something Nolan was very focused on, trying to make it seem as believable as possible to sort of suspend disbelief with mainstream audiences or just movie fans. And it was very successful. So they tried that approach because Goyer remains. Nolan, in some degree, was involved in helping Zack as well. There's actually some really cool footage of the both of them looking at dailies and stuff on the set of Man of Steel. And of course, more recently, I think earlier this year, Nolan had that really cool comment where he said, there's not a science fiction or superhero movie in the past 10 years that I don't see Zack Snyder's influence on. And, being a big fan of Zack myself, I was like, oh shit, like Nolan is giving flowers to Zack's style. That's crazy, but it tracks. So they worked together on that. The point is, coming out of Nolan's stuff, the approach was really to try to make it darker, gritty, and more realistic in a sense. And I do think that worked if you look at Man of Steel. And, the thing about DC was as Zack's stuff was going, and I think Batman v Superman was clearly just disappointing. That movie obviously should have made $1 billion, maybe more. I mean, these are two incredibly popular characters, right? So Batman v Superman is clearly a bad... it was a mistake in the franchise, right? It just, for whatever, it didn't connect. Maybe there was a version of it that was much better, but the theatrical version, whack. And it really breaks that universe. And remember, they have him doing Justice League, but they start tinkering with it like crazy to try to make it more like Marvel. They were looking at what Marvel was making with their movies and money, and they were like, we want to replicate that. Now, the thing that's wild is nowadays when you look at Zack's movies and how much money they made, and then you look at what all the other DC movies have made, minus like the Joker, and you're like, holy shit, maybe that was the peak. Like maybe that was the top of the mountain because, dude, Zack's stuff was making way more money than these movies make nowadays. Again, minus the Joker and strangely Aquaman for some reason. But point being, Gunn has taken a different approach. Okay, and it seems like what the reaction has been from both people at Warner Brothers, but also importantly from people that have been in these screenings, is that it might be the case that those people that were really mad about Man of Steel, they might really like Superman, dude. They might really like Superman, but the issue might be a whole bunch of people, and I'm talking about normies as well, that liked Man of Steel might not be able to appreciate this film. I think that's kind of the concern. Does that make sense to you guys? Is what I'm saying? Are you picking up what I'm setting down here? Just from what I'm reading here in the responses, that's kind of the vibes and the feeling that I'm getting. Now, I want to add one additional element to this. Last night on the Hot Mic podcast, Jeff Snyder had an interesting comment about the Superman movie, and he had an interesting comment about some of the changes made. Now, yesterday on the stream, I was telling you guys that, if the structure of the film has been changed, I had heard it was almost like an anthology thing rather than like a straight narrative. And I was sort of questioning on how much of that had been changed. Had it just been altered to have a better flow, or were they abandoning that and the framing device? Well, something interesting Jeff said last night was there was originally going to be this sort of vignetted framing style of days of the week. So you'd start on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and it sort of takes you through a day in the life of Superman each day. Okay. And according to Jeff, that has been removed. Now, I actually think that's kind of wild. Maybe they've just removed the vignetting style, which is, it's very similar to Seven, which both John and Jeff brought up last night. And it can absolutely work. I think vignetting is great. I mean, some of my favorite Marvel movies use that, especially the big ones, right? But if they're really removing it and just trying to get this thing to flow together just on its own as a straight narrative, that actually seems kind of wild, like, to be honest with you. And is it potentially just a normal part of the filmmaking process? Sure. Is that potentially also a radical difference from what it was when it was first screened? Yeah, dude. Like, that's potentially pretty wild. So I just wanted to bring that up because yesterday I was concerned about that exact change and the structural change to the thing. So I did not think they would go this far to remove the Monday, Tuesday stuff. That does feel a little bit wild. Now, let's talk about Fantastic Four, because this discussion is really about both movies. Super important movies, big summer movies, big for the comic book scene. You know, all eyes on these movies. The film industry is watching these movies closely. Comic book fans are watching these movies closely. The companies are watching these movies closely. So a lot on the line, right? So according to, viewer Anon and others, Superman's reactions are incredibly mixed. I think truly mixed when it comes to Superman. A lot of people love it. A lot of people really don't love it. It's not like you've got some people like, it's all right. No. Unfortunately, the reality is a lot of people don't like it. Okay, so it's like you got a big contingent of people that don't like this thing. And then you got a big contingent of people that really like it. And this divide, I mean, dude, it could be that more hardcore Superman people tend to be on this side. Maybe normies tend to be on this side. You know, it's kind of difficult to say. And then you have a totally different thing going on with Fantastic Four. And I just find it interesting. And apparently most of Fantastic Four is just in the middle, meaning you have sort of a smaller group of people that love it and a smaller group of people that hate it. The vast majority of people just think it's all right. Either like okay or pretty decent, like in the middle. So I hope that's making sense for you, because like that's kind of wild, you know? I'll add one thing to the Fantastic Four screening conversation. So I spoke to some people about this, and apparently it's incredibly uncommon for Marvel to do a screening in LA. Now, we talked about this yesterday. They don't do a lot of public screenings, but they kind of have been over the past couple of years. Unfortunately, it's been for a lot of the movies they're not confident about, right? So they didn't do this for Thunderbolts because they were super confident in it, but Captain America had many public screenings. That's a part of why all those leaks came out. The Marvels had many public screenings, and as did Quantumania. That's my understanding. So kind of unfortunate. But from what I understand, none of those movies had screenings in L.A. They usually do not do public screenings in L.A. for Marvel movies. So this Fantastic Four screening was very strange. And I think it was viewer Anon himself that said something to the effect of, Marvel tricked me. This is a secret Fantastic Four screening. Now, I later came to find out that a lot of people that went to this screening in LA thought it was for Superman. Okay? So now this is important because a lot of the mixed reactions from Fantastic Four, which again, to be crystal clear, are mixed in the middle, not mixed across the board. But it is possible, and I talked to some people that speculated that it was a lot of DC fans that were hoping to see Superman and instead saw Fantastic Four, and they were kind of bummed about it. And that's part of why they might have scored it lower. Now, that is pretty wild, and potentially some 6D chess from Kevin Feige, because I think he knows that Superman and Fantastic Four are in somewhat of competition, and people who have seen Superman before seeing Fantastic Four. So this could have been like some weird 6D chess move to literally get a bunch of influencers that are primed to be excited for Superman, make them watch Fantastic Four, and get some feedback. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm speculating on that, but I just wanted to say that because I did speak to some people that were like, I think it's a bunch of DC fans that were kind of butthurt about it, right? But either way, it is kind of strange that, like, Fantastic Four seems to be, like, I think Fantastic Four is getting dinged publicly a little bit more than Superman right now. And, you know, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. Part of this is Gunn, and, you know, he smashes a lot of discourse. He makes people feel uncomfortable for reporting on it and whatnot, right? So part of it's that. I think there's a contingent of people that just want to support Superman so much, and I know there's tension there between, like, Snyder supporters and Gunn supporters, whatever, right? But regardless of the reason, the reality is Superman's getting sort of unfair, I think, treatment, and not in a negative way, in a positive way. Whereas I think Fantastic Four is getting a little bit of unfair treatment in a negative way. Technically, the Fantastic Four screenings are going way better than Superman. Like that, I think that's just what it is. They're both mixed, but Superman's scores seem mixed from like people really don't like it sounds like a divisive movie. Whereas Fantastic Four's ultimate sin might be that it's just not the craziest thing ever. It's not really exciting, normies as much. But just, I was watching the Hot Mic podcast last night, which, by the way, shout out to John for shouting me out, I guess. I kind of told you guys when the Hulk story broke that Roka was the first that I heard that had it. And he had it in January, apparently. That's crazy, dude. That's a long time ago. So... yeah, Roka had it first, and then he appreciated that I gave him credit and whatnot. But, Jeff Steiner said something last night I thought was pretty on point, where he said expectations are everything. And if you have the right expectations, it will help your experience in the movie a lot better. We tend to be in this space where some people get mad about, leaks or even critic scores. Like, I've heard all kinds of cope, and people will be like, it doesn't even matter what the critic score is, this, that, second, and the third. But I think Jeff is right. I think expectations are really important. If you have the right expectations for a thing, it's going to help your experience, right? If you have the wrong set of expectations for a film and you go into it and it's this totally other thing, I think that's where a lot of disappointment can happen, and that can be kind of crazy. So in a sense, what we're doing right here, by following along with this, and then we will continue to follow along with it when we get into the reviews, the first social media reviews, and then the actual reviews themselves. This is all just about setting your personal expectations so that you can have a better time in the theater with this film. I also treat this a little bit like sports. So I just come from a more competitive, sports-esque kind of a background. So I've always applied that thinking to how I cover nerdy things. That's always been sort of inherent to the Den of Nerds. But I think even if you don't appreciate the competitive nature of this, I still think it's useful information. Like, it's useful to set those expectations. So again, as far as we understand it, Superman, very mixed, very mixed. Hardcore people seem to love it. Maybe your more casual people don't like it at all and potentially even hate it. Fantastic Four does seem to be getting a lot of scores that you would call mid, but that's like true mid. Like, people are on the middle of the road. They think it's all right or okay. Not a lot of people hating it. Not a lot of people loving it. And so adjust your expectations, curb your enthusiasm accordingly, and we'll follow along with more and more stuff as it comes out, guys, okay? Thanks for watching, and if you like this clip, smash a like on the actual video and subscribe to this channel. That way more of these clips get into your feed. I've also linked the full episode below if you want to check out the entire thing, including the Q&A we do with fans. You can also watch this show live. We do it live Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can also find all of my content, including the videos I put on my main YouTube channel, on the podcast feed.